All right, welcome to the Fantasy Finish Line podcast. This is week 7. We're going to talk about bye weeks and player trends and week 7 NFL fantasy preview. Cheers, Jess. Open her up. You can't cheers an empty glass after all, right? Well, it's a lovely evening here at the 11:05 studio, and I normally have Jason Evans here as my co-host for the Fantasy Finish Line podcast, but instead tonight, since Jason is on assignment in Wisconsin, and look out for all those Packer fans up there, Jason. We know what they can do. They can provide some delicious cheese.
They can own you.
And they can own you. I have my fiance and also a contributor and social media expert for Drink5.com, Jessica Robertson, here joining me.
Hi, guys.
And
ladies, hopefully.
And I am David Biggs here as your normal host, and we are here to provide you with a hopefully entertainment and a whole lot of really great information.
Absolutely.
So talking about what we have to offer for this particular episode, we're going to be going around the NFL, looking at news and interesting stories, talking about some spot starts that you can put in your team because of Week 7's crazy buys. We're going to be drinking some beers and some whiskey, and we'll also have a little bit of a betting kind of situation a little bit later.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Are you prepared for that?
I'm not exactly prepared, but I have the resources to come up with educated answers. So at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
That's great.
You know, not everyone has to be an expert when it comes to fantasy football. You just have to have the right tools for the job.
Yes, I mean,
leave the experts to the podcasting, or the experting to the podcasters.
Well, on that note, I just want to say it's been really great this year to have been pretty successful so far as Fantasy Pros rankings go. This past week, I was the number 6 expert as far as the weekly rankings went. Just a couple weeks ago, I was the number 10 expert. That's out of about 200 different pundits and experts in the fantasy community, and I really just want a medal. I would love to win the gold, silver, or bronze. But what we're happy about,
you can only go Myrrh,
is that we can say that our rankings here at Drink 5 are just as good in on a week by week basis as those from Sports Illustrated and from CBS Sports and from Yahoo and from anywhere else. So we're doing rather well. We've done a couple of shows explaining how our rankings work, the algorithm, without going into too much detail, of course. But I am excited to say that we are doing pretty well this year.
I'm impressed.
So let's segue into the most important thing of the night, which is, what are you drinking?
Absolutely. What are you drinking? So I know we featured the Fun Size Milk Stout on here recently. And by we, I mean you and Jason and me over there in the corner. From Pollyanna Brewing Company here in Illinois in the northwest suburbs. And I just like to, reiterate what's written here on the can. You're not you when you're thirsty, so satisfy that craving with this fun-sized treat. Yes, that is a play on the Snickers bar, and yes, I would say it tastes very similar to a Snickers bar. Also, it is peanut and chocolate flavor with cocoa nib, vanilla bean, and sea salt. I was gonna drop the ABV on you because I'm pretty sure it's at least 8%, if not higher. I'm not currently seeing it on here.
But it's hidden. It's a riddle.
I think so.
A vanilla bean wrapped in an enigma.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about you? What are you drinking?
I have the Imperial Hickster from Scorched Earth, which is local to us here in Algonquin, where Jess and I are from. And this particular beer is a part of their Hickster line, which is a cream ale, but they continue to build on that by putting that, I think the original recipe that they have through various iterations and different styles of beer. And this one's pretty cool. I don't know if you can see the artwork here, but it looks like he's almost in like a stormtrooper helmet, like it's the Imperial Death March.
Yeah.
Except the guy has a huge beard because he's the Hickster.
Because he's a Hickster, right.
So, love it. It's interesting brewery over there. We appreciate them. Shout out to Scorched Earth.
Yep, maybe we'll see you on Friday. Just saying.
And for all of you that have listened for many years now, because we've been doing this for a long time, we appreciate you, listening to our podcast year over year, week over week, month over month, through all these seasons. We hope that you get out of it what you need to dominate your leagues. That's the whole purpose of this. But we want you to know that we're also doing it on YouTube so that you can see us in living color. And we would love to get a like on that channel, for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, for you to ring the bell so you can get the notifications every time we have a new video that comes out. And whether or not you do, we're still going to continue doing the podcast itself, distributed on channels like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher and Google and everywhere else. So going right into the content that we have for today's show.
You should know that Jason is listening in and is already calling for a shot. Just so you know.
Well, Jason, you may not be here in physicality, but you're here in spirit.
Just so happens we have these queued up just for you.
And we happen to have some spirits right here, so we're gonna join you. So that's a little Woodford Reserve for those of you who are not watching on a live stream of video. It is a tasty, tasty whiskey. We did visit them once upon a time for our buddy Vince's bachelor party. And
you and Jason did.
I have to tell you,
I still have to get there.
Going to Woodford is an experience that everyone should have. Assuming they drink whiskey. Sure. Otherwise, it's just a nice location. But let's go around the NFL. So, the Browns are going to start Case Keenum this week on Thursday night versus the Broncos, with Baker Mayfield sidelined with a torn labrum in his left shoulder. The Browns also have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, of course, who are both ruled out for the week, leaving two virtually unknown running backs, D'Ernest Johnson and Demetric Felton, to lead the backfield. Honestly, Jess, this scenario might prove beneficial to Browns pass catchers Odell Beckham Jr., who has not been performing at a high level lately, and Jarvis Landry, who's coming back from IR and could rejoin the active roster this week. In what's proving to be a tough bye week for receivers especially, those might be options for Week 7.
Yeah, so Beckham has been averaging only 3.5 receptions and just over 7 fantasy points per game. Mm-hmm. Not great for us fantasy owners.
No.
So that's so far this season. But he has been targeted quite a lot over that time, actually. So maybe the problem is just as much Baker Mayfield as it is OBJ. Is it a catching problem? Is it a passing problem?
Yeah, I got to think it's both. And right now you have a shoulder injury to OBJ, which brought him back out of the game as he seemed to be doing a little bit better. And you have a shoulder injury for Baker Mayfield in the torn labrum. And they've been saying that Baker Mayfield may have been struggling through that for the past couple weeks. So I think it's just a missed connection. You know, like I saw you on the subway, you were in the green dress, you looked beautiful, but I just didn't get up the nerve to talk to you. Kadarius Toney aggravated an existing ankle injury in the opening drive of the Giants' Week 6 game against the Rams. It's especially sad, I think, for Toney and those with fantasy stock in Toney, because he was coming off a breakout game where he notched 10 receptions for 189 yards in Week 5 against the Cowboys. Now, even though he was ruled out of the game in the first quarter this past week, Toney had already recorded 3 receptions for 36 yards.
It's looking strong.
Yeah, so that's more evidence that the Giants intended to use him as the focal point of the passing offense. Imagine if the Giants actually had another guy who was out there like Odell Beckham Jr., who the Giants used to have, as well as Saquon Barkley, something that I don't think the Giants have had as far as both touch points of their offense doing well at the same time for a very long time. I don't think that that he's going to be put on injured reserve. The Giants coach Joe Judge said that they don't intend to put him on IR.
It's a good sign.
So it indicates that he's expected to recover within the next couple of weeks. But it's also very unlikely that he suits up for this next week in Week 7 against the Panthers.
So meanwhile, we have Sterling Shepard, who is healthy again. Bless, thank goodness to whoever you praise for that.
Praise be to Sterling Shepard.
Yes. And he was able to produce good fantasy numbers last week after Tony's exit from the game. And I know the pain of that. I also picked up Tony last week and started him. But Shepard caught 10 of 14 targets for 76 yards. As long as Tony is unable to play, Shepard should be a good start as a wide receiver 3 at least in PPR leagues.
Yeah, he has been scoring quite a bit, considering the fact that if you're not in a standard league and only scoring for yardage, he has been getting 6, 7, 8, 9, up to 10 receptions per week. And so if Tony is not playing, then he absolutely has to be started, at least on the bottom of your wide receiver list. I mean, you might have a stacked wide receiver list, like, for example, in one league, you just mentioned this last week when you were looking over my shoulder at a lineup. You're like, how do you have Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp?
2 of the top 3.
I'll tell you why. Because Cooper Kupp was not drafted extremely high this year. So you're able to get those kind of guys if you're lucky. But even people that have really great wide receiver 1 and 2s, the odds that you have 3 top 10 wide receivers are very low. So getting a guy like Sterling Shepard that has a huge floor that allows you to get at least 10, 11 points every single game, no matter what the outcome, is really, really nice for you.
For sure.
Let's talk about Deshaun Watson. He's back in the news as quite a few stories have come out this afternoon saying that Dolphins...
Not all scandalous.
No, not all of them. Saying that Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa may be playing his last game in the aqua orange and blue that Miami wears on this Sunday. This might be a three-way trade because Miami wants Watson, but Houston doesn't have any interest at all in acquiring Tua. So they're just looking for a collection of future first and second round draft picks. I was telling you earlier at dinner, they're looking for, I think, 3 first-round draft picks and 1 or 2 second-round draft picks. That's a huge collection of draft picks for Deshaun, but he is a top 5 dynasty quarterback. So the question is really whether or not he's going to be able to easily come back to play. The move will also reunite Watson with the speedster Will Fuller that he played with on Houston. I know you're familiar with Fuller. Mm-hmm. And he previously said, Watson did, that he would be interested in a trade to Miami. Watson has a no-trade, I forget what it's called, but he's able to say no to a trade if he wants to veto it.
No trade contract or
something.
Yeah,
it's in his contract.
It's in the bylines.
The NFL trade deadline itself is November 2nd. So after November 2nd, there is no trading that can happen in the NFL until we get to the off season. And so it's fast approaching. It'll be interesting to see what happens as a trade of this kind of magnitude is going to affect fantasy players a lot. There'll be a lot of implications.
Oh, yeah, especially with those dynasty leagues. I'm not personally in one right now, but I know that can be a huge thing. So what's on my mind, which may be on many other people's minds, what is going on with all those allegations? What's going to happen with all of that have been brought against Watson? There were 20 plus civil lawsuits. Some of them became criminal complaints. Mm-hmm. Isn't he currently under investigation? We seem to just be ignoring that, and he's still playing. Will he still be able to play this season in the NFL?
So he's not playing in that he's not suiting up and starting in actual games.
True.
And what Houston is doing right now is they're just considering him inactive every single week. But he is still on the active roster. He's just being considered inactive so that they can still trade him and try to get something for him. I think in answer to your question, the NFL itself has not made any final decisions as to what to do with Watson because they don't have to. They don't have to because Houston has never made him active. And generally, if there is an active criminal complaint that is being investigated, a player would be put on the commissioner's exempt list, meaning that they are not allowed to play, but that they'll be on like a paid absence, a paid leave. And I think that could happen if he goes to Miami. In my opinion, without getting too much into this in general, I think the charges will probably all this year either be dropped or there will be a huge lawsuit in case that comes up that won't happen until next year. So we're either going to see Watson able to play later this year or early next year, or not play this year or next year, and then come back after any charges or criminal lawsuits are put through and affected.
It's just amazing that he's made it this far and hasn't been completely cut off.
Yeah, I mean, so the NFL doesn't really want to get involved with it, right? And I guess it makes sense to some extent, is that they don't have to make a decision until they have to make a decision. But you know why they'll have to make a decision? If the Dolphins do trade for Watson, they're going to try to start him. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, should be interesting.
But regardless of whether or not they do end up starting Watson, it'll still have fantasy implications because Tua will probably go somewhere else. He won't remain in Miami. And Houston will have new draft picks and be suddenly under a higher level of rebuilding. And there may be some other components that get moved around as well.
Look forward to seeing how that all plays out.
Yeah, me too. All right, well, let's move ourselves right into Week 7 bye-week fill-ins.
Because not only do we have the bye-week issues, we also have all those injuries that we talked about last week. So I know Jason and I both were struggling with wide receiver replacements this week due to injuries and bye weeks. So as soon as you pour those up, we can get into that.
Well,
Troy.
we got Juxtaposed 6 on Twitter calling for shots, so we're going to give you what you want, sir. Let's do a little Woodford.
I'm not the official
For
licensed YouTube account, so I can't see everything you're seeing.
For those of you,
I'll take your word for it.
For those of you who are not privy to the internal conversation, or you're not watching on YouTube, we're doing another shot of Woodford Reserve here. So cheers, Jess. Before we move on to these less than stellar Week 7 bye-week fill-ins.
Gotta do what we gotta do.
Mm-hmm. And hello, Bolt fan in the chat room as well. If you have any lineup questions or anything you'd like to ask us or comments, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We're going to talk about Week 7 bye-week fill-ins right now. Running backs out for Week 7. We're going to start with running backs. So you guys know we have the Buffalo Bills, the Dallas Cowboys, Jacksonville Jaguars, Los Angeles Chargers, Minnesota Vikings, and Pittsburgh Steelers all out for bye right now. That means that Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard, James Robinson, Austin Eckler, Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison, and Najee Harris are all unable to be played for this particular week's fantasy production. So
it's a lot.
When you have those guys out,
I've got some Zeke problems myself.
Sometimes you might have one or two of them on your squad. You have to fill
and the
those
Dalvin
blanks.
Cook, yeah.
And it's also possible that maybe you drafted without bye weeks in mind in particular, something that I do actually. We can get into this in redraft strategy show, but I don't feel like making sure that you always have everyone on different bye weeks. I don't feel like that's an important part of drafting. I feel like the important part of drafting is making sure you have the best players available and you deal with it as it comes.
So, for example, I had asked you the other day, when you are drafting, do you still pay attention to how many people you have on the same bye week? And
Yeah.
you said no. And I can concur that this year I did not do that either. Now, this is my...
Well, I said
This
no.
is my
I said no
10th
with a
year.
caveat, though. I said no, except if you have, if you're talking about quarterback or tight end, and you're gonna
Right.
and you're gonna draft in a redraft league that only plays one of each position, Then, if you're drafting more than one of those positions, for example, 2 quarterbacks or 2 tight ends in a league that only plays one of them,
Which I
then
usually do.
then you have to.
Make sure that
Otherwise,
they're not on the same week.
if you draft 2 tight ends that
Otherwise,
both have
what's the point?
a bye week of 7,
Yeah, exactly.
not a good situation.
And I don't draft more than one kicker at a time, more than one defense at a time. But obviously, you run into those issues now. Defense, I switch out every week. That's just the smart thing to do, I think. Kickers, if you have a high-ranking kicker, I feel like a Justin Tucker you can stick with the whole year.
Well,
But you still have bye week issues.
I will agree with Justin Tucker.
Thank you. And yes, I know another friend who would agree. Anyway, I don't know if he's listening in right now, but yes. When I first started playing, like I said, this is my 10th year actually. I definitely paid attention to that during the draft and tried to make sure that I didn't have more than 2 or 3 guys in the same week. This year, I just said, let's just throw it all out there. Whatever happens, happens.
Okay.
Anyway.
No, I agree. With the exception of the quarterbacks or tight ends, or like you mentioned, the kickers or defense, you're talking about offensive skill positions of wide receiver, running back, and wide receiver and running back primarily. There's no real reason to look at the bye weeks when you're drafting. Now, one strategy I could offer people as sort of something to look back at is, if it's possible, maybe you could try to find the guys with the same bye week. Because wouldn't it be nice if you just lost 1 week when everyone was on bye and then didn't have to worry about it again?
That could be interesting.
The other possibility is...
That's a strategy.
The other possibility is... But it's a stretch, because you have to stretch to find those players. They may not be who you want to draft. The other possibility is, what if, since you have those weeks 1 through 6 or 1 through 5 before bye weeks actually start, what if you look ahead and see who is on your team that has a bye week, and then just consistently trade those players to other teams that have players that you want that already had their bye weeks? You could form a team that never has a bye week by always trading for those players that have already had their bye week. Then you are automatically gaining value, assuming that those players have a consistent base scoring.
I feel like that's definitely for the advanced player, which I feel like the majority of the people who listen to this podcast are more of the advanced players.
It could be an advanced strategy.
And even though, like I said, I have been playing for 10 years, I have
you're not on that tip yet.
Right. One league I have 2 championships. Another league that's only been going for 3 or 4 years now, I have a championship there. I need to get more into the trading.
Well, it sounds like you have 3 ships. If you have like 5 ships, you got an armada. So, you're on your way.
Yeah.
Let's talk about these running back bye week fill-ins. So, although D'Ernest Johnson, who's 32% owned in flea flicker leagues, will find it very hard to earn a regular role in this offense, with Nick Chubb likely returning from a multi-week calf injury in Week 8 against the Steelers. Week 6 against the Steelers. Kareem Hunt will be out until at least Week 10. So there is some wiggle room for more fantasy production if Johnson shows up in a big way on Thursday Night Football. I'm not expecting really big things here, but did you know that Johnson, who is a running back, D'Ernest Johnson, for the Cleveland Browns, was the most targeted receiver from Case Keenum during the preseason?
I did not. Cannot honestly say. In fact, I feel like this week is the first time I've really heard his name.
So
either I just wasn't paying attention.
No. So unless you watched preseason football, a lot of people that play fantasy are not watching all of the early games. And these are the games in which D'Ernest Johnson really made a name for himself. It's more about for the team or for those players that are in Dynasty or Devy that watch all these kinds of things. But I have to say, Andrew Erickson, who's an analyst for Pro Football Focus, he pointed this out today on Twitter. Have to give him credit. First of all, he deserves a follow for those of you looking to get a leg up on competition in your league. So follow Andrew Erickson. But secondly, this developing situation has about a 60-40 percentage chance, in my estimation, of turning D'Ernest Johnson into a reasonable play. And by reasonable play, I mean someone who scores around 10 fantasy points in half PPR or PPR leagues. This week, and I currently have him as the RB24. So I'm ranking him pretty high. What do you think about that?
That's pretty high. But now don't forget that last year when Chubb got hurt, Johnson came in and he put up 13 carries for 95 yards. I had to dig deep for those stats.
Yeah, 13 for 95.
Yeah. So he could definitely carve out a role in that offense, especially considering that Hunt's injury was described as significant, which I don't like because I have. Anyway, his injury was described as significant. So he could easily miss more than just the minimum 3 weeks. So that could be a good potential there for, D'Ernest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, she's looking back at 2020, saying that Johnson was there putting up points when Chubb was gone. And so I have to agree. If Hunt is gone for 4, 5, 6 weeks and D'Ernest does well there, then you could see him carve out a role that's similar to what Hunt had, which is an RB2 or 3 or flex position on your team every week. So suddenly you have a waiver wire or an acquisition, a transaction on your team that you thought could just be a week 7 bye-week fill-in that might end up being someone for the rest of the year to provide fantasy value. And we don't even know to the extent that Nick Chubb is injured, but a calf injury is usually something that only takes a week or two max to get over. So good work on that analysis. It's tough to recommend a running back from the New England Patriots, but Ramondre Stevenson, who's 41% owned in flea flicker leagues, he's seeing more usage in the offense. So last week he put up 13.7 fantasy points. That's 5 carries for 23 yards, a touchdown, and 3 receptions for 39 yards.
Not too shabby for a name that most people probably aren't very familiar with.
Yeah, again, and that's the point of today's podcast, is talking about these players that maybe you're not familiar with, because they can, 1, help with the bye-week fill-in spot starts, or 2, be someone that maybe jumps up into your team and gets to be a flex player all year long. Damian Harris, he's the incumbent running back for the New England Patriots, the starter there. His involvement in the passing game has been trending down. So he registered only 1 target over the past 2 weeks. Now, although Damian Harris has certainly been getting the lion's share of short yardage work and goal line work as a running back, he has not been getting almost any of the passing down and third down work as a running back in the New England offense. So the armchair analysis from watching both players over the past 2 weeks, taking into account this week's matchup against the Jets, who allow the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs, that's 22.5 fantasy points per game, says that Ramondre should be an okay fill-in for week 7. And again, like D'Ernest Johnson, Ramondre has the additional perk that he could go on to provide flex value going forward as well. And he's my running back 35 this week.
Okay, now but what about Brandon Bolden, who's been filling the James White role on the New England offense this season? I know he only had 1 target last week. That's painful. But he had 16 targets between week 3 and 5. Is he just an afterthought now with Ramondre Stevenson coming in at the number 2 spot in New England?
Yeah, I think so. I think Ramondre has come on. You know what happened to him is I think in the first week or the second week, Ramondre is a rookie this year.
Okay.
In the first week or second week of the season, he had a fumble. Bill Belichick,
shut it down.
Historically hates when people come in and don't do their job correctly, or they lose the football.
Job.
Exactly. And so what he'll normally do is penalize someone or just knock them out of their job for a couple weeks. And I think that's what happened with Ramondre. But he was drafted to be that guy, and it looks to me like he is getting another chance. So unless he fumbles again or has some kind of a misstep that occurs, I think that Ramondre Stevenson is going to end up being that number 2 guy. And Damian Harris, like any running back for the New England Patriots, should watch out, because Bill Belichick doesn't give a shit what your name is and where you come from and who you are and how you've been doing. Yep. He only cares how you are doing. And so Ramondre Stevenson could be a guy that we end up talking about in week 12, as assuming that's not the Patriots bye week, of course, because I'm not sure what that is. Just just talking about it off kilter. But he could be a guy we talk about in week 12 as, a top 10 running back. Because whoever is going to be the running back in that offense, whoever Bill gives the shot to, will generally be successful.
Right.
That's always been traditionally the hard thing about this offense, determining who Bill likes and who is the guy that will get the carries.
And who's not on his shit list.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right. So we have some comments from the chat that I want to bring up. Jason says, someone in my Dynasty League spent $41 out of $100 on D'Ernest Johnson. And I think that's more than you need to spend, but I got to tell you, he does have the chance to be a lot more than you think he will, based on Kareem Hunt and what we just talked about him maybe being a 4-6, maybe even more week injury. Nick Chubb has a calf injury, but God knows how long he'll actually be out. And as we know on the Cleveland Browns offense, any of those guys could be a consistent threat week after week if there's just a 1B to that 1A. We've got a couple other questions, but we'll get to those in a little bit. I want to get back to our other running backs.
The New England bye week for you.
Oh,
That's what I was doing.
It's not a big deal. I'm just saying I didn't want to throw out week 12 and then they were on bye. Other running backs to consider picking up for your spot start, your flex position, or starting for someone who is on bye this week are J.D. McKissick, who's 70% owned. Now, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to grab a guy like J.D. who's 70% owned, but there are some leagues that he is available in. He's our RB25. Jess, you and I talked about this earlier. J.D. is very much a boomer bust guy, depending on how the Washington offense is running and how Antonio Gibson is as far as his health is concerned.
Yeah, so depending on the rest of my lineup, the other options that I have him. I think I have only started him once because, like you said, boomer bust, and it's such a risky play sometimes.
Yeah. And the other guy is Le'Veon Bell, who's 30% owned. He was last week marked to the active roster on the Ravens, and then he ended up scoring a touchdown and I think getting 8 carries for some amount of yards. He did not have exemplary play during that game. However, it looks as though it may just be Devonta Freeman and Le'Veon Bell going forward, at least for next week. And so Le'Veon Bell, who could be available on the wire in your league right now, is clearly an option as far as a guy with upside when you may not have that currently on your bench. Let's talk about wide receivers. So you know the teams, I just mentioned them earlier, that are out for this bye week, but let's just run through the guys, the wide receivers. And of course, there are more of these than running backs because there are more wide receivers that get played fruitfully on a team.
Which is probably why Jason and so many other people and I all have wide receiver problems this week.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. I think if you're in more than 5 or 6 leagues, you have one league where it's impossible for you to feel the wide receiver core, and you're just looking around or trying to trade or something. So the guys that are out for week 7, Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Deontay Johnson, and Chase Claypool. A lot of good wide receivers that are in that top 20 that I just mentioned right there. Let's talk about guys that could possibly fill in for them that may be available on your league's waiver wire or free agent list right now. The first guy, Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's 28% owned in Flea Flicker leagues. He is experiencing a positive trend in fantasy production from 0 in week 4 to 9.5 in week 5 to 26.1 in week 6. Does that make you happy? Do you see that? And
I like those trends. I like those trends.
So with both starting running backs out in Cleveland, OBJ, we talked about earlier.
Talked about his shoulder.
He's nursing a grade 3 shoulder sprain. He might be in the game, but he still has a shoulder injury. And Landry coming off IR this week. No guarantee of starting, but he is supposed to be coming off IR, or perhaps they'll extend that to next week. Peoples-Jones, calculated risk to start this week on your roster. Last week, he caught 4 receptions on 5 targets for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns. We mentioned earlier that D'Ernest Johnson was a favorite preseason target of backup quarterback Case Keenum, who's filling in for Baker Mayfield. Well, so was Donovan Peoples-Jones. And we often see backup quarterbacks have the most success with the players that they are most familiar with. It's too hard to predict touchdowns, especially in this volatile of a situation.
Truth.
But I think we'll see at least 5 targets for Peoples-Jones based on the past week's historical, which could be enough to prove a reasonable spot start this week as the WR53 I have him ranked at. Now, that's still higher than a lot of other experts. And if you look back at last week, you see that he had an outlier week.
Okay.
But because there's a trend, because there are injuries at the other wide receiver positions, because there are injuries at running back, because the quarterback that throws to him is the same one that threw to him in the preseason, then they're more familiar with each other. All these things lead to the same path.
Absolutely. Now, with Beckham and Landry both questionable, and Chubb and Hunt both out for this coming week, are there a few other playmakers from the Browns specifically that could be considered playable in case Johnson and Peoples-Jones are unavailable? Rashad Higgins, perhaps?
Rashard Higgins, okay. So Rashard Higgins is like the slot guy over there right now. I know that most people don't want to just pick out additional people from the Browns that are further...
Additional peoples?
Yeah. But I believe that Rashard Higgins has been getting pretty consistent targets, like 6, 7, 8 points per game. You also have the tight ends there on that team, Austin Hooper and David Njoku. David Njoku has been more successful than Hooper, but I'm not sure about any of those guys right now. If anyone, I would say Rashard Higgins, the guy you mentioned. He could be a good spot starter. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that I would delve into the tight ends on the Browns, especially in the situation where they're going into their backup quarterback as the starter. But
it definitely helps that a player has had a relationship with the quarterback before.
Yes, absolutely. Can you look and see if there's any other questions in chat? And I will move on to the next guy. Brian Edwards, 32% owned in Flea Flicker leagues, has long been a prospect that fantasy team managers have looked at, but he hasn't been consistent enough to start on a week-to-week basis. He might still not be quite there, but the consistency is picking up. He has a 76% snap share on the season, which is more than both Henry Ruggs and Hunter Renfrow. Now, for anyone out there, Tad, I'm looking at you, a contributor here for Drink 5, who's a huge Raiders fan. I bet he didn't know this, that Brian Edwards actually plays more snaps on a regular, consistent basis than Henry Ruggs and Hunter Renfrow, 2 wide receivers that are enjoying better wide receiver stats than Edwards is. But Edwards has 4.5 targets per game so far in 2021. His performance is trending up, but it's trending up from a very low level, much like the guy we just talked about, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Week 4, 0.9 points. Week 5, 3.2. Week 6, 7.7. Still not what you're looking for, right?
Not quite.
But he's playing against a beatable Eagles secondary who's middle of the road against the pass. I think we can consider him to be a big play receiver that is finally getting consistent opportunities in the offense. Start with caution, but also with a good amount of upside as the WR54 in my rankings this week. This is right after Donovan Peoples-Jones. So there's 2 guys that are both owned, at least in Flea Flicker leagues, in only a third of the, a little bit less than a third of the leagues that are out there. And so the odds of you being able to pick them up are, or at least one of them, is pretty high.
Yeah, and he's already had a few targets inside the red zone so far this year. So the possibility of a touchdown is there. And that's, that red zone is very important. We talked about, I don't remember who we were talking about, someone who wasn't getting a lot of passes, but was getting a lot of red zone activity.
Yeah, he has been getting red zone looks, and that is important. I think maybe what we talk about sometimes on the podcast is that regression, the regression towards the mean. And Brian Edwards might be one of those guys that has not had touchdowns yet, but he'll regress towards those touchdowns because it's likely, based on the game plan of the offense, that he will continue to get red zone targets, and some of them will end up becoming touchdowns.
They have to, as long as you can hold on to that ball. So yeah, this is a tough decision. Since Edwards has had 2 games over 10 fantasy points earlier in the season, but has only caught 5 passes in the last 3 games.
Right.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Are there any other possible fill-ins that we could bring up?
Yeah, other wide receivers to consider here. We have Demarcus Robinson. He's 12% owned, a wide receiver 58, of course, a wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. And Randall Cobb, 32% owned, wide receiver 60, requested specifically by Aaron Rodgers as a requirement to bring Aaron Rodgers back into the fold. Randall Cobb just had 2 touchdowns. Magically, that's not going to continue to happen. However, we think that he'll still have a lot of very clutch plays. Now, that could be 2 first downs in a game, or it could be 2 touchdowns. It's really up to Rodgers and Cobb, and I don't think they're going to leak any of that information. I'm just saying. I doubt it. Why don't we take a little drink break here and move on to some lineup questions?
Sure.
All right.
The sound of endless love growing inside infinity of island universes, allowing all causality to dream.
Waiting for flowers to bloom, waiting for life to resume someday soon. Anyway, maybe it's time to postpone.
All right. Well, let's get back into it. And Jess, is there anything that struck you as interesting over the discussion that we had about those Week 7 bye-week fill-ins?
Just the thing that I think is funny is when we talk about a wide receiver 53 or a wide receiver 60.
Uh-huh.
Like, normally not someone that you would ever consider. But considering that we have the bye weeks and we have injuries, those are the kind of numbers that we have to resort to, and that's not always a bad thing.
Yeah, if you think about it as in a league where you have 3 wide receivers starting, then you've got 10 on
Or
each
even
team.
3 wide receivers and a flex. Sometimes you're starting 4 wide receivers.
Right. So you have 10 or 12 teams starting 3 wide receivers or 4 wide receivers. Then suddenly you have up to 36 or 48 wide receivers that are already starting on teams. That's not including the people on the benches. So your wide receiver 57 could be someone that is just off of starting for somebody else.
Right.
And of course, that's not what they are all year. That's just what they are this week.
Right.
And so some of these guys, they might score 11 points, and then I'm going to put them back down to wide receiver 76. It all depends on the situation.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you were mentioning being top 6 in the week for wide receivers or running backs on Fantasy Pros.
Overall, this past week, just number 6 overall.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So yes, I use Fantasy Pros myself. And so when I'm looking to set my lineups and do waiver picks, I always go to the cheat sheet and I flip back and forth between the current week, so in this case week 7, versus rest of season.
Yeah.
So you're not always going to look at rest of season. Sometimes you need to know what's going to be good this week because of injuries. Because what's good this week might not be good 3 weeks from now. So looking at that, overall is not necessarily going to be helpful for the immediate future. And in some leagues, we are in a league called a guillotine league. It's called Off With Their Heads, and each week the person with the lowest score gets eliminated. So that one is
beautiful league.
really, it really is. So that one's really important to be looking at week to week and not just rest of season.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that had anything to do with your question, but
It all has to do with my question. So Jason, being away in Wisconsin this week, wasn't able to grace us with his presence here physically on the show. However, he did provide some over-under lines for you and I to bet on for this particular week. So I'm going to write down what we decide on these particular gambits, but I'm just going to read them out. Matthew Stafford, of course, he's the quarterback for the Rams. He's going up against Detroit this particular week, which is the team that he came from. Stafford's return to Detroit, as Jason puts it, he'll certainly get a huge welcome from the fans. And while this isn't as big as Brady returning to Foxborough, I'd like to see it. He's been quite consistent this season. Over-under line is set at 21 points. That's 21 points for Matthew Stafford. And you get to start, and we'll just alternate. So you can say over or under 21 points for Matthew Stafford against Detroit.
okay. So I am going to go with over. I'm going to go with over.
Yeah. And I'm going to go with over as well.
Oh, we are allowed to pick the same thing.
We are.
Interesting. Okay.
And we have to decide what we're going to bet
Yeah, I was going to say,
on.
but what are we betting on? I originally suggested a $60 bottle of wine
$60 bottle of
from
wine.
Napa Valley from a winery called Cake Bread. I don't know. Those stakes might be a little high.
That's amazing.
It's just a wine that I've been wanting to try for years now, and I've not gotten around to buying it.
Well, I'm going to look like an asshole if I don't say yes
I
to
didn't
this bet.
necessarily say that should be it, but
So this is the cake bread bet.
Cake Bread.
We're doing it. So either way, we both get to try it, right? Aaron Jones, running back, Green Bay versus Washington. I get to start this one. The football team, who's, of course, Washington football team, their defense has been a huge disappointment this year. Aaron Jones has only one breakout game and many good
Against
but not
Detroit in week
great
2.
ones. Over-underline is set at 17.5 points for Aaron Jones. Is he going to have a really great game against Washington, or will he just have an okay game and it won't be really great? And I am going to say that he's going to have a great game over.
I'm also gonna go with over.
Jess is going over.
We can't end all of these with the same. There's
If
gotta be
we-
a tiebreaker.
If we bet everything the same, then it means that we just have to split the bottle of cake bread.
It means that we've been together for too long. Oh, that would be fine. Then we each get to pay half. You know.
And it's horrible for the audience. Jamar Chase, this is your turn. Wide receiver, Cincinnati at Baltimore. Chase has been the most exciting rookie to watch all season. He turned a crappy preseason into a Rookie of the Year campaign. This week it's a tough matchup against Baltimore, giving up the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So the over-under for Jamar Chase is 13.5 points. Does he score over or under 13.5 points?
So what I find interesting is from week 1 to 6, his points are 20-13, 22-13, 27-13. So the trend would say he's going to score over 20, but I don't think he's going to do that against Baltimore. I feel like I need to take the under on this. I feel like this is going to buck the trend, if you will. High, low, high, low. He's going to go low twice.
I'll go over.
You're going to stick with the trend. I like it.
Kyle Pitts is the last one. Tight end, Atlanta at Miami. Pitts finally had his breakout game in London. Then he had a bye week. Now he gets to face the struggling Dolphins. The over-under is set at 9.4 points. For a guy who had a breakout game last week, does he go over or under? And I get to go first on this one. And I'm going to say that he goes under.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to go over then. Not because you're going under, but, not to be argumentative. I'm going to go over.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jason, for preparing those questions.
Thanks, Jay.
That's going to be for a $60 bottle of cake bread, and I think we've answered them sufficiently different enough, unless Jess and I tie on those last two. with
And then
our
we split the bottle.
with our opposite answers, and then we'll split the bottle and we'll both drink it. So that'll be fine. I'm
Oh, does the winner get to drink the bottle to themselves?
no, well, we didn't go over that. I don't think.
I'm willing to share.
Oh my goodness. So if you check out the chat room, if there's anything else that needs to be brought up, I'm going to start going over the cut list for this particular week. We have the J cut
Hey,
list.
wait, what's this fake news?
Just read it over before you broadcast it on air. Quarterback Taylor Heineke owned in 41% of Flea Flicker leagues. Started strong and scored over 20 fantasy points each game in week 2, 3, and 4, but has now been held under 12 points for 2 weeks in a row. And last week against the Chiefs, good matchup for him on paper. You're right. He should have done better, but he didn't. So that's a cut. Sam Darnold owned in 66% of Flea Flicker leagues. His rushing ability was making up for his other skills at quarterback, but at this point, he has the same amount of interceptions as he does passing touchdowns. 7 and 7. 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Sam Darnold, you cannot be trusted as a consistent option. For any leagues in which you are playing one quarterback specifically, these guys should not be on your lineup. For some reason, they still are. People are hanging on to them. People are not letting go. Jess, any input on the quarterbacks?
No. I mean, I don't know why they're holding on so tightly.
A lot of people just don't like change. They don't like to go out and affect
it.
things. But if you don't like change as a fantasy team manager,
You got
don't expect
bigger
to
problems.
win. Don't expect to win leagues.
Well, for example, let's see. Someone, oh no, he's still in the top 10. I was going to say someone that I'm having trouble letting go of. I was going to say Joe Burrow, but
No, Burrow's been great. Burrow has been very good, throwing 2 touchdowns in almost every single one of his games. You should have no problem starting Burrow going forward.
right, but go on.
Running backs, Myles Gaskin, 89% owned. Can you believe that, guys? Well, I can, because of the 26.9 points he scored in week 5. However, people are still holding on to him. You know what? Let's be honest. Before then, he was trending down. Last week, he disappointed with very little usage and a fumble. There was 1 week that he did well in. 1 week. And yet, we're still 90% owned, basically, with Myles Gaskin. Let's give up the ghost, guys. Myles Gaskin, not going to be a fantasy league winner. Just give it up. Nyheim Hines, 68% owned. Over the past 3 weeks, we've been seeing Marlon Mack being used in situations where Hines would normally be on the field. Maybe this is part of an effort to raise Mack's trade value to ship him off somewhere else. But either way, it means that Nyheim Hines is unstartable right now because he is being his work's being divided with Marlon Mack. And that is just not something that's acceptable for us as Nyheim Hines owners. We should not allow this to occur. After a couple of good games that he had, unfortunately, we're going to have to let him go. Curtis Samuel, wide receivers, 58% owned. He is simply not contributing anything this year. Everyone except for Curtis's mom should drop him and redraft fantasy leagues. Now, I don't care if Curtis Samuel's mom keeps him. That's fine. It's up to him. It's up to her. It's up to family situations. But
I know what my issue was with Joe Burrow. It's because I've been starting Josh Allen, but I have Joe Burrow as my second quarterback for when I have Joe Burrow on bye, when I have Josh Allen on bye, which is this week.
Yeah, so you'll start Joe Burrow once. You have a really good lineup. Josh Allen and Joe Burrow is great. So nothing to complain about over there.
Right.
If you have Curtis Samuel, you do not need him on your team. He is not playing, and he is horrible. Drop him.
My bigger problem is who I think you're going to talk about next, Devontae Parker.
Devontae Parker, 67% owned. He has lingering shoulder and hamstring injuries. Trade rumors are swirling all around Parker. We're not even sure who the quarterback is going to be. The Dolphins have been up and down all year. This is not a guy that you should start with any kind of consistency. Now, I don't know where you drafted Parker, but you could clearly find someone who is more consistent and healthy than having this guy on your bench. It did seem like the news today said that Parker might play this week, but is that really what you want? Do you really want to go down this Parker roller coaster? I think that he'll probably give you games that are 12 points and then 3 points. That's the kind of a situation that you want to avoid. This is all my opinion, of course. Now, you have Devontae Parker on what kind of a team? Redraft league with 10 teams?
Redraft, yeah. I feel like I just got rid of him.
So there's probably other players that you could pick
I
up.
think I must have picked someone else up. I'm not seeing him on here anymore. I think I must have just recently dropped him. So
Well, all right.
yeah. So that's the good news.
Jason Evans in the chat.
Oh no, here he is. I still have him here on Off with Their Heads Guillotine League. Get rid of him, right?
Correct. Jason
Find
Evans.
someone better.
Jason Evans in the chat is spewing some knowledge, saying that Miles Sanders, even if he is bad, is going to score more points than CMC over the next few weeks. Now,
It's not because CMC isn't going to be in.
Well-
so of course everyone's going to score more points than him.
well, few to me is something that means 3 to 4, and so that's not necessarily accurate. Because Christian McCaffrey went on IR, 2 weeks ago now, which means that he
Last week?
which
I feel
means
like it
that-
was just announced last week.
which means that he could come back sooner
Christian
than
McCaffrey, yeah, because we thought that he was going to start back this week in week 6, and it was announced that he was going on IR, that he needed more time to recover. We hope he recovers. We need him back.
right.
The worst thing that can happen to your team is losing your first round draft pick. I've learned this from experience. Hopefully, we'll survive.
But you shouldn't let that, identify you as a team. You shouldn't let that create your persona. Just because you lost someone does not mean you can't win.
Doesn't mean we can't move forward.
Hot seat, Allen Robinson, 92% owned. That's 92% owned in Flea Flicker leagues. Has not scored over 10 fantasy points the entire season.
Crazy.
He's had 1 touchdown. He averages 3 receptions per game since week 2. So he's on the hot seat for me because Allen Robinson is as most of us know, at least those of us who have played more than one fantasy season, an amazing wide receiver, regardless of his quarterback. With Blake Bortles, with whoever he had or has been able to put up a lot of fantasy points.
Blows my mind how mediocre he's been this year.
But it's not about Robinson. It's about the offensive passing scheme and the quarterback for the Chicago Bears. And that much is clear based on his past history. What I'm saying is this. If Justin Fields, his quarterback on the Chicago Bears, can't find a connection with Robinson against Tampa Bay, who has been open to all sorts of really great wide receiver performances this year, then it's time to give up on Robinson.
You're saying it could be another misconnection on the Metro.
That's right. On the Metro. Misconnection. I hope not. Because Allen Robinson is a good receiver when you look at all things aside from their situations. But we'll see what happens. I'm giving him one more shot, and if he is not able to break out and the Bears are not able to target him in a way that makes sense, then I guess I have to cut loose. For the tight end position, I only have one guy who I've said multiple times over the past couple weeks, but you guys are not listening. 73% owned. Robert Tonyan is still owned by a huge number of teams. Robert Tonyan, who has not scored more than 2 fantasy points per game in 4 weeks.
Insane.
It's every single week. It's been 1 point something. And yet everyone just is it just Packers fans? There's that many Packers fans that love Robert Tonyan
High
that
on
much.
him.
Unbelievable, Jess. Unbelievable. So,
No, I must be. Oh, I'm confusing him with Tony. So never mind. I was gonna say I thought he was supposed to be some hot pickup last week. No, that was Kadarius Tony.
that is the Tony. You are
Not
correct.
Tonyan,
You're
Tony.
correct. So, anything else that you'd like to add before we head off?
Nothing majorly significant. I wish
Okay.
I had some wise words of wisdom.
Well,
WWWs.
I'd like to thank you for joining me today on the show. Can you pour a couple of shots for us?
Get some closing shots here.
I'd like to thank Jason, even though he's on location, for providing the bet for us. That is fantastic, and we'll go over the results of that next week after we play through all of this week's fantasy football. I would like to remind everybody to go onto our channel on YouTube. You can find it under Drink 5, all one word. Please like the channel and click the bell when you're watching the video to be able to see every single time there's a new video. Follow us on Facebook at Drink5 Network, also on Twitter at Drink5, and Jason and myself will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. We can do that on Twitter.
And if you put questions on Instagram, I'll forward it on to them.
And Jess can answer those
Or I
questions.
can help too. You know, I've got some of the same resources and
Heck yeah.
outlooks on things. On an unrelated note, you asked if I had any closing thoughts or anything.
That was a couple of minutes ago, though.
It was. I had time to think
You're
about
still
it.
welcome to give some.
I had time to think about it. I thought it was very funny that since we were talking about moms, Patrick Mahomes' mother feels that a tipped interception should not count against her son, and I kind of agree with her.
Do you think there's a petition that we could sign or something? Well,
I love my little Patrick Mahomes, and I agree with his mama.
Why don't we
that
cheers
shouldn't count against him.
to Patrick Mahomes' mom, and to everyone out there listening to the Fantasy Finish Line podcast. We
I feel like her
appreciate
name was
you guys.
Tony, maybe?
To Tony.
To Tony Mahomes, if that's her name. I hope it is, because otherwise I butchered it.
To Tony Mahomey.
Tony Mahomey.
Good night. Drink 5.
Drink 5.